The Great War, also known as World War I, just keep in mind they wouldn't have called it World War I at the time because no one would have guessed there was going to be a World War II. So generally it's referred to as the Great War. So I apologize kind of for the blurry picture here. This is actually from the National Museum of World War I in America. And great museum. If you ever get a chance to go to it, you should. This is actually looking at different countries. You can kind of see like Germany there, Belgium, Great Britain, so on and so forth and everything. So this is kind of supposed to be kind of a mental image for Europe at this time. Looking at the Great War, we have to look at the origins of it first. First of all, very few Americans were prepared for this war that's going to erupt in Europe basically in August of 1914. Fewer still are going to see the United States ever becoming actually involved in it. Most are going to really support neutrality, but we are going to see America is going to be drawn into the war as their neutrality is undercut over time. But before we can talk about America, we have to kind of look at this war and how it gets started in Europe. The thing is, in the lead up to this war, we're seeing all of these European rivalries. These are like economic rivalries where they're competing militarily. They've got a lot of diplomatic maneuvering around each other. Plus, they're all competing internationally, so you've got that tension as well. And then on top of that, you have this complex system of alliances. So we're going to have two sides in this conflict. The first side is the Central Powers. Please make note of that. A lot of people call them the wrong name. It's the Central Powers. The Central Powers are going to include Germany, that is led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we're going to see later get broken up and everything like that. We also are going to have like Bulgaria and Turkey included in those Central Powers, versus the other side, which is the Allies. So it's the Central Powers versus the Allies. The Allies are going to include Great Britain, France, and Tsarist Russia, as well as others, but those are really the big three in this. So what exactly led up to it? The thing is, a Serbian terrorist is going to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. The crazy thing is, really at the time when this happened, no one actually cared that much. This really is going to be the spark that lights the war, but it's a really long fuse, if you're going to use that analogy, because actually during this time period, people were more concerned about basically there was this woman who was married to the Minister of Finance in France, and she had killed a reporter, and she was on trial, and so everybody across Europe is watching this trial, and she ends up being acquitted on regards of that, oh, it was a crime of passion, and she was a woman and couldn't control her emotions and everything. It's nuts. Literally, she's acquitted like the same day World War I actually breaks out fighting. So the thing is, the Serbian terrorist that kills Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not actually like part of the Serbian Empire or anything like that. He was a part of a fringe organization. However, Germany really was wanting basically for this conflict to have. Everyone in Europe was knowing this conflict was going to occur on some level, and so this was kind of an excuse to start it. And so Germany really is going to push their ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to declare war on Serbia for having killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So the thing is, after that happens, after Austria declares war on Serbia with Germany's support, Serbia has an ally, that is Russia. And so Russia has to mobilize their troops in support of Serbia. Now notice they're not declaring war. The thing is, though, at this time period, it takes a while to get your troops to different countries and everything. And so the first country to mobilize is going to have an edge in the conflict. So when Russia mobilizes their troops, this is basically seen as an act of war. So Germany, in turn, declares war on Russia. Well, France has an alliance with Russia. So France mobilizes their troops in support of Russia. So Germany declares war on France. Then the thing is, if you're going to go from Germany into France, you have to go through Belgium. So Germany invades Belgium, and Britain says, whoa, Germany, get out of Belgium. Germany doesn't get out of Belgium fast enough. They're not going to leave Belgium at all. Belgium was actually a neutral party in all this, and so Great Britain declares war on Germany. At that point, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war on Russia. Serbia declares war on Germany. Great Britain declares war on Austria-Hungary. Germany invades France. Japan declares war on Germany. Like I said, all kinds of an alliance system and everything. Turkey enters the war on the German side, so this means Russia has to declare war on Turkey, and then Britain has to declare war on Turkey, and then France has to declare war on Turkey. Italy declares war on the Austria-Hungary. Russia then declares war on Bulgaria. Bulgaria declares war on Serbia. Germany declares war on Portugal. Yada, yada, yada. All of this happens really pretty quickly, within just a couple of months. And then it's not until 1917 that the United States will declare war on Germany. When World War I breaks out, we basically are going to see mass slaughter envelop Europe. You have these huge armies would battle to stalemate. You have trenches that are going to stretch across France and Belgium in particular. You can actually see these trenches to a certain point today in ridges that are still there. When I have these trenches are going across France and Belgium, this is basically the British and France are fighting Germany via these trench warfare and everything. So you get very little movement occurring, and you get really terrible casualties. There's a lot of shock at the carnage of this war. Soldiers are going to suffer in the cold, and they're surrounded by mud and surrounded by decaying bodies. There's a lot of morbid sense of humor, partly because of that. One of the stories of this time period was at one point, troops on the British-French side, there was a man that had died, and literally his body was in the side of the trench, but his hand was sticking out, and the troops would shake his hand every time they passed. If you want to get a really good visual representation of all this, I would definitely recommend watching the movie 1917, and you can see how extensive the trenches were and everything at the very, very beginning of the movie. It's done really, really well. Excellent movie. Definitely would recommend it if you get a chance to watch it. You can see some of that morbid sense of humor also at the beginning that fits really well with this war. This is a really, really big war, and I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of times if you go to Europe, they hold this war very close to themselves because there was an element of there was this excitement for war, and whole villages, all of the young men would sign up to go fight, and they'd all be assigned to the same platoon, so to speak, and then they'd all go out and they'd all die, and none of them would come home. And it wasn't until later that they figured out, okay, we're gonna split up people, and we're not gonna let them to all fight in the same group if they're from the same town, basically. So it's kind of one of those things, it really changes the landscape of Europe, and they have a lot of remembrance for it. If you ever travel abroad in Europe and you see someone wearing the red poppy, that is a symbol of remembrance of World War I specifically. However, this is an American history class, so as much as we need to know that origin of the war, what about America? The thing is, when it comes to the United States, most Americans had no interest in the war and did not want the United States to get involved. In fact, the president, Woodrow Wilson, is going to issue a proclamation of neutrality. And he would urge Americans, be neutral in fact, be neutral in name, be impartial in action, be impartial in thought. Well, obviously, that's not always going to be the case, though. I mean, even think today when we're neutral in certain conflicts around the world, people still have opinions and take sides. So, for instance, German Americans generally sided with Germany in this conflict. Irish Americans tended to just be against Great Britain, which would put them on the Central Power side. But most Americans actually tended to sympathize with the Allied side, partly because they felt more closely aligned with Great Britain and France. Just look at American history, where a lot of people had come from originally, and really the biggest first ally America ever had during, the American Revolution is France. So just ethnically, culturally, economically, they felt a kinship with those two nations. Now, that being said, most Americans were repelled by Tsarist Russia, but there you go. A lot of Americans saw Germany as being too militaristic, especially after Germany had violated Belgium's neutrality by marching through it and everything. Wilson himself generally admired Britain's culture and government and distrusted Germany's imperial actions. Him and a lot of other politicians really felt like if Germany had an overwhelming victory, that might actually threaten America's economic, political, or even strategic interests around the globe. Now, if you did want to point out somebody at this time that was really purely neutral, a great example of that would be Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan. He was really genuinely neutral. But besides him, most officials, like Woodrow Wilson, tended to favor the Allied side. Now, as much as there was sympathy there, that did not mean Americans wanted to intervene. The thing is, really, America did not have any intention of joining the conflict, and with all of the carnage that comes out of it, that just solidifies a lot of Americans' convictions. And so Wilson is really going to be determined to pursue a policy of peace.